I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and didn't cause trouble, maybe, just maybe, I'd be enough to be seen. But growing up in my family, I was never the daughter that mattered. My sister Sarah was always the golden child. She didn't just shine, our parents polished her until she sparkled. It wasn't subtle either. Every A she brought home was celebrated like she'd won a Nobel Prize. Meanwhile, if I got the same grade, the response was, "That's nice. Did you see Sarah's science trophy?" We lived just outside Chicago in a neighborhood where people notice things, like how my parents would brag endlessly about Sarah at block parties, church, even the grocery store. Sarah got into the top business school in the country, they'd say, smiling with pride, like they were the ones earning her achievements. No one ever heard about my college scholarships or how I made Dean's List every semester while working 2 jobs. My wins were background noise. Hers were headliners. I wasn't jealous at first. I just wanted to belong, to be acknowledged for my quiet strength, my persistence. But the gap kept growing. Sarah got the big birthday parties, the designer clothes, the full ride funded by mom and dad to an elite university, plus spring breaks in Cancun. I got hand-me-downs and the suggestion to look into community college to save everyone money. I used to hide in my room with books and code. Programming gave me something Sarah couldn't take: logic, order, fairness. Computers didn't care if I was the favorite. They responded to work, to effort, to precision. And so I stayed the course. I kept my head down, finished undergrad with honors in computer science, and dared to dream bigger. But when you grow up being told, without words, that you're second place, it eats at you. Not all at once, slowly, quietly, until you can barely remember what it feels like to be chosen, celebrated, or even heard. I was 32 when I finally asked my parents for something. Just one thing. And that simple request, the hope they might finally see me, was the moment they decided I didn't belong in their family anymore. It was a Sunday night after dinner. We had just finished eating at the family restaurant, the one they'd poured their lives and apparently every spare dollar into for years. I waited until dessert was cleared, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the scrape of forks on plates. This was it, my one shot at finally asking for what Sarah had always been handed freely: support. I got accepted into a top MBA program, I began, forcing a smile. It's a huge step for my career. I'd love to tell you about it. They nodded, distracted. Mom asked if I'd seen Sarah's latest magazine feature. Dad brought up how Sarah had landed another consulting contract for the restaurant. I waited, bit my tongue, tried again. "I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to help. Maybe co-sign a loan," I said carefully, "just so I'm not completely buried in debt." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom blinked. Dad leaned back, arms crossed. It was like I'd asked them to sell their house or give me a kidney. Finally, Dad said, "We can't help you. We need to think about our future now." And Mom, sweet, passive-aggressive Mom, added, "We paid for Sarah's education because she was investing in the family business. An MBA is just for you." Just for me, as if I wasn't part of this family, as if my future wasn't worth even a signature on a form. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded like it didn't hurt, but inside, something cracked wide open. I didn't want a handout. I wasn't asking for lavish Cancun vacations. I just wanted the same shot they'd given Sarah, the same belief in my potential. They wouldn't even co-sign a loan. That night, I drove back to my tiny apartment and sat on the floor, surrounded by unpaid bills and scholarship paperwork. And after hours of fighting the tears, I did something I'd never done before. I called Aunt Margaret, my dad's older sister, the one they never liked to talk about, the one they whispered about at holidays, always with a hint of resentment in their voices. But she picked up on the first ring. And what she said changed everything. When Aunt Margaret picked up the phone, her voice was like a lifeline. Calm, warm, steady. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said, like she'd been waiting, like she somehow knew I'd reached this breaking point. I told her everything. How my parents refused to co-sign the loan, how Sarah had always been the priority, and how I didn't know if I could carry this debt alone. I expected hesitation or maybe polite sympathy. What I got was something I'll never forget. "Of course I'll help you," she said without missing a beat. "I've watched them hold you back long enough. It would be an honor to invest in your future." I couldn't even speak. My chest tightened with a kind of emotion I hadn't felt in years: relief, validation, love without conditions. Still, I was nervous. My dad hated being in her shadow. The last thing I wanted was to start a war between them, so I asked Aunt Margaret if we could keep it quiet. No drama, no family explosions. She agreed, and for a while, everything was peaceful. I started my MBA program with her full support, even moved into a small place closer to campus. I worked hard. I studied harder. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was becoming someone on my own terms. Not Sarah's shadow, not the backup daughter. Then one night, it all unraveled. I came home from work, ready to share good news. I'd been chosen to lead a team project at school. But the house was tense, silent. My heart knew something was wrong the second I walked in. There were boxes, my things, packed, my clothes, my laptop, even my bedding. Sarah was standing there, arms crossed, smirking. My parents were on the couch, eyes filled with betrayal and rage. And in my dad's hands, printed emails, dozens of them, faked, forged to look like I had traded away family business secrets to Aunt Margaret in exchange for tuition. Recipes, financial records, supplier contacts, all fabricated by my sister, and in that moment I saw it clearly. Sarah hadn't just hated that I succeeded. She had planned to destroy me for it. I stood frozen, the weight of those forged emails in my hands, my parents' eyes burning holes through me. My mom's hands trembled as she held back tears, while my dad looked like he was ready to explode. "Explain this," he growled, shoving the papers closer. This isn't real," I stammered. "These emails are fake. I never sent anything like this." But they weren't listening. They didn't want to listen. Sarah stood off to the side, arms folded across her chest, like she had just won a game she'd been playing for years. She didn't have to say anything. Her smug expression said it all. She'd orchestrated this. She'd found my emails with Aunt Margaret, twisted them, and painted me as a traitor to the family. And my parents believed her, because they always believed her. I pleaded with them. I tried to explain that Aunt Margaret was just helping me the same way they helped Sarah, that I hadn't betrayed anything, that I didn't even have access to the things I was being accused of giving away. But my dad cut me off coldly. "You need to leave. We won't have a traitor living under this roof." Just like that. No investigation, no conversation, no faith in me after a lifetime of loyalty. My mom cried silently, but she didn't stop him. And Sarah, she didn't say a word, just stood there victorious. I packed what I could fit in my car, a few boxes, some clothes, my laptop. I remember the neighbors peeking out their windows, pretending not to stare while I loaded my life into a trunk. I didn't look back. That night, I called Aunt Margaret, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Come home. Right now." And I did. I showed up at her apartment, broken and ashamed. She opened the door, pulled me into a hug, and said, "You did nothing wrong. This isn't your fault." In that moment, I finally believed it. But I also knew one thing. Sarah didn't just get me kicked out of the house. She declared war. The first few nights at Aunt Margaret's apartment felt like waking up from a nightmare, only to realize I hadn't actually escaped it yet. I was safe, yes, but my heart was shattered. I kept hearing my dad's voice echoing, "You need to leave," over and over again like a song stuck on repeat. Margaret did everything she could to make me feel welcome. She cleared out her guest room, stocked the fridge with my favorite snacks, and even bought me a new set of sheets, deep blue ones, the exact color I had back at home. But it wasn't home. It was a place to land, not a place to fall apart. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of that night, wondering how someone could twist reality so cruelly, and how the people who raised me could believe it so easily. I started my MBA classes a week later. I should have been excited. I had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and Aunt Margaret had given me this incredible chance. But I walked into orientation with a knot in my chest, afraid that someone would see right through me, see that I wasn't the bright, confident woman my application painted me to be. But then something happened. We were split into small groups to talk about what brought us to the program. When it was my turn, I almost froze. But I looked around and saw faces. Curious, kind, open. So I told them a watered-down version of the truth, that I had to overcome a lot to get here, that it meant more than just a career move. And they listened, no judgment, just quiet understanding. That night, for the first time in weeks, I cried, not because I was broken, but because I realized I was still whole. Scarred, yes. Betrayed, absolutely, but still standing. Margaret and I started having dinner together every Thursday. She'd ask about my classes, and I'd ask about her surgeries. Slowly, laughter came back. Bit by bit, the weight lifted. Sarah had tried to erase me from my own family, but she didn't realize. She freed me instead. 3 years passed in a blur of growth, grit, and healing. I graduated with honors, landed a job at one of the top consulting firms in Chicago, moved into my own apartment, small but mine. Aunt Margaret and I became closer than I'd ever been with anyone in my so-called family. For the first time, I had peace. And then, out of nowhere, Sarah showed up at my door. I didn't recognize her at first. The always polished golden child was gone. No designer handbag, no blowout curls, no smug smile. Just an oversized sweater, dark circles under her eyes, and the kind of hesitation I'd never seen on her face. I should have shut the door. Instead, I said, "What do you want?" She stepped inside like the apartment might reject her too. Sat on the edge of my couch like it burned. For a moment, she just stared at her hands. Then she finally said it. "I need your help." My stomach turned. The words spilled from her like a confession. The family business, our parents' pride and joy, was crumbling. The big expansion Dad bet everything on had failed. They were drowning in debt. Sarah said Mom was falling apart. Dad was considering bankruptcy. I said nothing. I wanted her to feel the silence, to sit in it like I had that night I came home to my life packed in boxes. Then she added, "You're doing so well. Maybe you could offer advice?" Advice. What she meant was money, a rescue plan. I laughed, sharp, bitter. "After 3 years of silence, after what you did to me, you want my help?" She didn't even try to deny it. "I was jealous," she said softly. "You were finally doing something for yourself and I panicked. I'm sorry." But sorry was too easy. Sorry didn't undo the betrayal, didn't unpack the trauma. "You know what's funny?" I said, standing. "I used to wish you'd finally see me for who I am. Now I don't care if you ever do." I didn't kick her out. She left on her own, saying she understood if I needed time. I stood at the door after she was gone, heart pounding, knowing this wasn't over. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse than Sarah begging at my doorstep, my parents made their grand return at my workplace. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was knee-deep in a budget review meeting when my assistant buzzed in. "There's an older couple in the lobby," she said hesitantly. "They say they're your parents." I froze. For a second, I thought she had to be mistaken. But no, of course not. They had finally figured out where I worked, probably through some backdoor family channel, or maybe Sarah handed it over. Regardless, there they were, sitting awkwardly on the office lobby couch while suited professionals walked past them. I stepped into the lobby with my heart thudding. The last time I'd seen them, they were throwing me out of their house for something I didn't do. And now they looked small, hunched shoulders, pale skin. The pride that used to radiate from them was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen before, desperation. "We need to talk," Dad said, his voice rough, barely more than a whisper. I didn't want a scene at work, so I took them to a nearby coffee shop. We sat down at a small table. They looked uncomfortable, like the air was too thick. Then Mom spoke first. "We were wrong," she said, her voice cracking. "We should never have shut you out. We're so sorry." 3 years I'd waited to hear that, but sitting there, I didn't feel joy or relief, just emptiness. Their words landed flat, like an apology rehearsed too many times to sound real. Then came the real reason they were here. The business wasn't just failing, it was imploding. They were being investigated for tax issues, health code violations, and shady supplier contracts. Bankruptcy wasn't a possibility anymore, it was inevitable. They were terrified of losing everything, and they wanted me to fix it. Dad leaned in. "You have an MBA, you're doing well, you could save us." That moment was like a mirror shattering. After all this time, they didn't come for reconciliation. They came for salvation. From the daughter they had discarded. I sipped my coffee calmly. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I'm not your safety net." And for the first time in my life, I truly meant it. After leaving that coffee shop, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't even second-guess myself. That surprised me more than anything. For most of my life, I'd been conditioned to put my family first, to be the bigger person. But sitting across from my parents, hearing them admit to illegal activity, not out of remorse, but because they were out of options, I knew this wasn't just about family anymore. It was about right and wrong, about protecting myself. That night, I sat in Aunt Margaret's living room, still in my work clothes, hands clenched around a mug of tea. She listened quietly as I told her everything they'd said. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she simply asked, "What are you going to do?" I stared into my tea. "I don't know, but if I don't act, more people could get hurt." She nodded. "Then you already have your answer." And I did. The next day, I contacted the appropriate authorities, the IRS, the health department, even local law enforcement. I submitted everything I knew, their violations, the suspected fraud, the shortcuts they'd confessed to over coffee like it was nothing. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability. The fallout came fast. The restaurant was shut down for immediate inspection. Investigators found everything from unlicensed labor to expired food storage. A formal audit began. My parents were blindsided. Sarah called me furious, screaming into the phone that I'd ruined them, that I was heartless, that I'd destroyed our legacy. I didn't answer. I didn't owe her a response. Aunt Margaret stood by me through it all. When the threats turned into pleas, then back into threats, she reminded me that protecting myself doesn't make me selfish. It makes me sane. It's surreal, watching your childhood home collapse from the outside. There's no satisfaction in their pain, no joy in their suffering, but there's peace, knowing that I drew a line they can't cross anymore. They wanted me to carry their consequences. Instead, I chose to carry my own freedom. The weeks following my report felt like a blur. News spread fast in our community. The beloved family-owned restaurant, once the pride of my parents, was now closed for violations under investigation. Some whispered about money laundering, others talked about unpaid workers. All I knew was that the truth had finally surfaced, and for once I wasn't the villain in someone else's fantasy. The calls didn't stop. First from Sarah, voice trembling with rage, accusing me of destroying our family legacy. Then from my mother, who went from pleading to blaming within seconds. My dad left one voicemail. "I hope you're proud of yourself." Strangely enough, I wasn't proud, but I was calm, like I'd finally stepped out of a burning house and realized how long I'd been inhaling smoke. Work became my sanctuary. The people there didn't care about family gossip or favoritism. They cared about results, and I delivered. I was recently approached for a leadership role in one of our new strategic divisions. It felt earned, real, mine. One afternoon, I came home to a message from Sarah. No screaming this time, just 4 words. "The baby is yours." I stared at my phone for a long time. It was like being gut-punched after finally catching your breath. She had disappeared after the restaurant collapsed, along with all the money she'd once mocked me for not having. And now she was back, dropping a bomb that shattered any remaining emotional distance I'd built. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to my attorney and asked for guidance. Aunt Margaret sat beside me that night, rubbing my shoulder gently. "You can still be a good person and set boundaries," she said. "Let your lawyer handle it. If that child is yours, you'll do what's right. But you don't owe Sarah a place in your life." She was right. For once, I had the tools, the resources, and the clarity to respond, not react. I went to bed that night with tears on my pillow, not out of grief, but out of release. I wasn't that girl anymore, the forgotten daughter begging to be seen. I was a woman with choices, and I had finally chosen myself. Just when I thought the chaos had finally died down, it came rushing back in the most unexpected way. It was a regular Thursday afternoon. I was in a meeting at work, discussing a new client strategy when my assistant buzzed in. "Hey, there are 2 people in the lobby asking for you. They said they're your parents." I froze. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I hadn't seen them in over 3 years. Not since they threw me out. Not since they believed Sarah's lies without question. My heart pounded as I excused myself and made my way to the lobby. There they were, Mom and Dad, only smaller somehow. Older, worn down. Dad's proud posture was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and a look of exhaustion. Mom's face was drawn, her once perfect hair completely gray. I stood there in silence, unsure of what to say. My dad broke it first. "We need to talk," he said, voice rough. I didn't want to bring that mess into my workplace, so I led them to a small coffee shop down the street. The walk there felt like years. We sat in silence. I waited. Mom finally spoke. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We should have never kicked you out. We're sorry." I blinked. That moment, the apology I had imagined so many times, it finally happened. But it didn't feel like I thought it would. No closure, no joy, just emptiness. Then Dad added, "We want you to come home. Help us fix this. We're family. We need you." And just like that, the truth slipped out. The restaurant wasn't just in trouble, it was crumbling. On top of bankruptcy, they were facing legal trouble from health code violations and tax fraud. Everything they had built was unraveling. "You need my help," I repeated quietly. "After everything you did, you're asking me to save you?" They said yes. They were desperate. Suddenly, I wasn't the worthless daughter anymore. I was their only hope. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I looked at them, really looked, and said, "I'm sorry. But I won't sacrifice everything I've worked for just to save you from your own choices." As I stood to leave, Dad's voice rose behind me, angry again. "We'll lose everything." I turned to him calmly and said, "Then maybe you'll finally understand what it felt like when I lost you." Leaving that coffee shop was like stepping out from under a storm cloud I didn't realize had been hanging over me for years. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just walked, steady and calm, like the weight of their expectations had finally slid off my shoulders. But deep inside, something was unraveling, a painful realization that the people who were supposed to protect me, love me unconditionally, had only come back because they needed saving. Over the next few days, their calls poured in. First pleading, then guilt-tripping, then angry. Sarah even left a voice message sobbing, blaming me for destroying what little was left of our family. But I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not when every time I heard their voices, all I could think about was standing in that living room years ago with my belongings in boxes, accused of betrayal for chasing my own dream. Not when they dismissed me without hesitation, but expected me to now risk everything, my job, my stability, my future, for them. I knew I couldn't stay silent forever, so I made a choice. I reported everything, the health violations, the unpaid taxes, the falsified invoices. I sent what I knew to the appropriate agencies. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability. If I had looked the other way, people could have gotten hurt. Employees, customers, suppliers who were being cheated out of payments. That week was hell. Sarah called me every name under the sun. My father left a voicemail saying he never wanted to see my face again. And yet, I felt strangely free. It wasn't easy. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I'd done the right thing, if I had finally gone too far. But then I'd remember Aunt Margaret's words. Sometimes doing what's right feels like betrayal to those who've benefited from your silence. She was right. I didn't owe them silence anymore, or forgiveness they never truly earned. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. I chose peace. The fallout came fast. The restaurant officially shut its doors a month after I filed the reports. Investigations confirmed everything: unpaid taxes, health code violations, and worse, financial fraud. Sarah and my parents are now facing legal consequences. Sarah's tearful voicemail said I'd ruined the family legacy. But what legacy was there to ruin? A legacy built on favoritism, manipulation, and abandonment? As for me, I've never felt more steady. Work has been going better than ever. I recently got promoted, senior project manager. The woman who once cried herself to sleep in Aunt Margaret's guest room now leads teams on multi-million-dollar initiatives. My colleagues see me, They respect me. No one here calls me second best. Aunt Margaret and I booked a trip to Italy. It's something we dreamed about for years. Not just a vacation, but a celebration. Of survival, of starting over, of freedom. Sarah hasn't stopped trying to contact me. She sent one last message saying Mom and Dad might lose their house, and that she never meant for things to go so far. But her remorse only came when the walls caved in, not when I stood there years ago begging them to hear me. I didn't respond. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, just like I did with all the others. I'm not heartless. I still ache for the little girl inside me who only ever wanted her parents to be proud. But I've come to accept that some people love you conditionally, and others, like Aunt Margaret, love you without strings. And I choose the latter every time. I walk through my life now with quiet pride, not because everything is perfect, but because I survived being discarded, lied about, and erased. I rebuilt myself from ashes. This isn't a happy ending wrapped in a bow. This is real life, and sometimes healing doesn't look like forgiveness. It looks like distance. It looks like saying no, and it looks like finally saying, this is my life, and I get to live it on my own terms.